Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Great. So as I was just sharing, we are part of the global network of the Savory Institute. So we are one of 50 hubs accredited to bring the universal knowledge that makes up holistic management to the local context. In our case, northern Spain and France. And now, thanks to our collaborations with Range for the Sahara, we have begun to work in Niger, and with CEDARE working here in Egypt and in the Nile region. There we go. Okay. So the Savory Institute was founded by Alan Savory. Alan Savory is a Zimbabwean ecologist who just turned 90 this year. These are some pictures of us. These are some pictures of us with him last fall. Okay, move that. So Alan began his career as an ecologist in Zimbabwe when the country was newly independent, working in national parks. And so at that time, what they discovered was the creation of national parks were meant to conserve these very important nature and diverse regions. But what happened was having the removal of human management, the populations came out of control, and that's what led to overgrazing, or that's what they thought, that overgrazing that led to the environmental destruction of these naturally protected areas were actually as a result of lack of human management. We were no longer providing the thank you so much. We were no longer providing, there we go, the influence that human populations have traditionally had with wildlife over millennia. And so having removed that human influence, the animals were left to their own devices. They overgrazed everything, which has then led to extreme environmental destruction, not just in Zimbabwe, but all over the world. And so we're going to look into deeper of what's happening and why that's happening. The world began to understand Alan's work through a TED Talk that he held a number of years ago, which has had more than 9 million views. I do this all the time. There it goes. Okay. So the TED Talk has had over 9 million views. It's 20 minutes long. You can have the link here. Highly recommend to watch it, because what it does is it helps us to understand the role of animals in nature, but also how, having removed much of the wildlife over the course of industrialization and civilization over the last several centuries, how that removal of that animal impact in nature has actually been one of the key causes of desertification, and how by reintroducing those animals through livestock can help us to reverse climate change. It outlines very concretely how our decisions as organizations, as individual people, as land managers, have that very direct impact on the land, and how we can, by shifting the way that we manage land and natural resources, help to stop the desertification and finally reverse climate change. So holistic management helps us to build capacity because it is a decision-making framework. It allows us to manage for outcomes. There's a lot of focus these days on predictive management concepts, or certification schemes, which are box ticking exercises, which tells you that you must do this, that, or the other thing in order to be considered sustainable or organic or regenerative or whatever it is. But what we are instead trying to do is focus on outcomes, be very clear on what we are trying to achieve so that we can take those steps to get there. Holistic management allows us to tie the decisions and the actions of what we do to the natural physiology of the maximum productivity of the land. What that means is, how can we, by what we decide from everything that we do, whether we are a student, a professional, a land manager, running an NGO, an association, a government, anything that we do professionally or in our lives has an impact on nature and the land. So how can we understand that those decisions, and then make sure that those decisions are actually achieving the outcomes that we're looking for? It allows us to adjust in real time our decisions. We have our feedback loop that allows us to see that everything that we've planned, how that can come to fruition, because we know that life is complex. There are many things outside of our control. So when we plan an activity or a project, how can we be making sure that that we get the results that we're looking for? We talk a lot about complexity versus this concept of complicated. So, and the nature is complex in the sense that it is constantly shifting. When we remove a species, or a species dies out, or there's a disease, or a fire, or an earthquake, or what have you, whenever anything adjusts, then nature adjusts naturally. And that's how we are then able to follow that example that nature has set, and allow for our human systems to replicate that. The same way that we can replicate within our projects, or within our businesses, or within our families. It's how can we be managing that complexity? When people look at holistic management from an agricultural perspective, or from a land-based management perspective, it's important to understand that this universal knowledge is then applicable to any scale, to any pedoclimatic type. For agriculture, for policy, there are some who see that holistic management can only apply for small farms. But we have colleagues in Australia with managing holistically on 100,000 hectares, or they say, oh, it's only for large farms. Well, with ours, with 3.5 hectares, we manage just fine. Whether you're in an area that is desertifying, or in very arid regions, or in less arid regions, or in even humid regions, holistic management works because of the universal concepts, which we're going to get into now, of how nature works. Holistic management is not a list of techniques, or a checklist of what you must and must do, must or must not do. It is not solely grazing practices either. There's, for those who have maybe heard of holistic management, that is a misnomer. You will see how using livestock as an ecosystem tool is a very key piece of this work when we are doing land management. But there's so much more to the framework and to how we're making these decisions. It is absolutely context-based, and I think that's where one of the opportunities, but also one of the challenges comes in, is because every organization is different, every farm is different, every family is different. So understanding how we can be applying this knowledge to those different contexts is where the opportunity really lies, because what is works for my family is not what is going to work for the neighbor's family, but we all understand that these underlying guiding principles are the same. And that's where it's going to help us when we're designing projects and when we're designing how we're going to implement a similar concept, but in different regions, for example. And it's important to understand that holistic management doesn't only look for ecological outcomes, it is very much tied in with economic and social as well. I think key to a lot of the work that we're doing with holistic management is understanding that it's animals, and in place of wildlife, livestock are key to ecology and are key to the grasslands that we're working with. Even though we're in areas that are desertified, they are inherently grasslands. 2/3 of the planet are grasslands. These are areas where that are not appropriate for arable agricultural production, that are not urban regions, that these are lands which the only way to convert the energy that the solar energy is providing onto the land is through the use of livestock, and we're going to talk a bit more about that. But by understanding the roles of animals in the ecosystem as livestock as regeneration tools, it helps us to disconnect from whether we're talking about a certain species or a certain production model or a certain output. What we're able to understand is how we can be shifting the ecosystem towards what we're trying to achieve, right? So in this case, stopping and reversing desertification, how we can be using animals in order to do that. By having this focus on socioeconomic resilience, using livestock as ecosystem management tools, what we're able to do is then shift meat and dairy production towards regeneration so that they become climate positive. We're able to take unproductive land. So if we think of desertified areas where nothing is growing, how we can be shifting this unproductive land into production again, such as with land reclamation and land regeneration. Helps us to reverse desertification, helps us to regenerate ecologies and focus on bringing back the water resources. We talk often about how with holistic management or regenerative agriculture, that by shifting lands back into production, if we do it on a large enough scale, we're able to then call the rains back and be bringing back the water cycle into function. These systems and the knowledge at the foundation of these systems work equally for larger scale farms, so commercial size farming, and as well as for pastoral and semi-pastoral communities, which is why we're focused on the international year focused on the pastoralists. So as you'll see here on the left side, this is the holistic management framework. This is where all of the work that we do is rooted, because what it allows us to do is to understand whether we are managing a farm or we are managing a project or we are managing a business or a family, everything that we would want to do or need to do is somehow bound inside this framework. And this is the framework that Alan developed after 30 years of research and development and putting it into practice in environments all over the world. in very different contexts, and then coming together in the 80s to create what is this framework that we know today. So what we see on the right-hand side, this is the Africa Center for Holistic Management in Zimbabwe. So this is Alan's home in the Bangombe. And what you see here on the top is land that has been managed holistically for 30 years. And what you see on the bottom is the national park 15 kilometers away on the very same day. What it shows is that the ecosystem functions the same everywhere, but it's our management that's different. And so our management can create a situation where the water cycle is functioning, where plants are growing, where we have rivers flowing, or if we don't follow these systems, then we can have the sheer destruction that we see on the bottom. I think it's important to understand that in this region of Zimbabwe, they get about 350 millimeters of rain per year during a very short rain season and a very long dry season. When I had the opportunity to visit the Africa Center in September last year, it was a mind-blowing experience, honestly, because it had been 6 months since the end of the rainy season, and there was still forage that was almost up to my shoulders. I'm a meter 85, so these are very high shoulders. So there was all this forage that was still of nutritional quality and very high that was available for the cattle. You'll see a video later on. The cattle were fat 6 months after the rain stopped, and for me, that is really just the proof in the pudding. But as you can see from this photo, everything that we do has an impact, and we can choose to work with the ecosystem, or we can choose to work aside from her. So holistic management's foundations are on these 4 key insights that Alan identified over 2 decades of working with land managers throughout Southern Africa and then else over into the Americas. These 4 concepts are what help us to understand how the ecosystem works no matter where we are. The concept of predator and prey is key. It's this understanding that large groups of prey animals, wildlife, over large expanses of grasslands, whether they were in Africa or in Central Asia, the Americas, Australia. Australia, no, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. Everywhere but Australia, but that's another story. Had always developed the grasslands developed alongside these huge groups of animals traveling together in packs for safety. Again, trying to protect themselves against predators. So what happened was that this predator pressure would follow these groups of animals. It would bunch them up for safety. They would all be together, where they would break up the ground with their hooves, where they would eat the grass, where they would defecate, and then they would move on thanks to that predator pressure, which meant that these animals were never in the same place for more than 2 or 3 days at a time. So when the predators would move them off, then there would be a long time before those animals came back. And by the time those animals came back, then all of that nutrition, all of that manure and urine that had been left on that land when they left had been infiltrated, had decomposed, and then the grass had all grown back and was ready to be grazed again. So it's that movement of animals, that high impact, high density, short stays, and then long recovery times that are so that are that are so key to this concept, and understanding that it's the perennial grasses in these grasslands that developed alongside this predator and prey pressure. So you can imagine that if you have animals in a place for a very long time and they eat down those grasses and then they can't grow back, or it takes a very long time for them to grow back. But the perennial plants, they developed with that need for that animal impact. Another concept that Alan came up with over time was the concept of the brittleness scale. So all of our actions would be the same, but the results of those actions would depend on where we are in the brittleness scale. One being constant humidity in the environment, such as rainforest, and 10 being almost no humidity in the environment, such as a desert, right? So if we can think of having grazed a piece of land in an area where there's humidity regularly in the environment, then the natural decomposition processes will happen over time. And you don't have to introduce that moisture in order to keep the mineral cycles moving. Whereas in the more arid desertified areas, the only humidity in those areas are actually what's in the stomach of the animals. So that's the way to be able to continue the decomposition and keep the cycle of life moving, right? When we talk about brittleness, if we think about a dead leaf in an area with a lot of humidity, it won't break, it will bend. Whereas this dead leaf in a brittle area, when you bend it, it will break. That's where this concept comes from, because it's that lack of moisture that's available. We understand that water is the limiting factor of life. That lack of water availability requires us to take decisions in a different way that are going to help us to, or that are going to force us to ensure that we're using that moisture to keep life going as best as possible. The third key concept is the concept of time. When we often think about overgrazing or having too much animal impact, we think of there being too many animals, when in fact it's not too many animals, it's too much time. You can have 1,000 animals in a hectare for an hour, and it's going to have an impact. It's going to have a lot of impact, but you're not going to destroy that land. If you had those 1,000 animals in that hectare for a month, you would destroy that land. So it's understanding this time piece. It's time that the animals are on the land, but then it's also the time that the land has had to recover until the animals come back. We talk about the concept of recovery when the plant has had enough time to grow back. And then we talk about the concept of rest. And we understand that if we think of animals as ecosystem management tools, really what we're talking about is their ability to convert biomass, so to convert solar energy that has been photosynthesized to create plants, convert that into energy that can be consumed by humans or by other beings. But it's also to get that solar energy into the ground as quickly as possible, so that those nutrients are then available to then grow back again. It's this constant cycling. So it's how can we be using those animals to do that? but we have to avoid these issues of overgrazing of plants. There's no such thing as overgrazing a field, because you can have a plant that is overgrazed and you can have a plant that is overrested. That it is, instead of being cycled biologically back into the soil, to then have those nutrients available for plants to then grow back, then it would be then decomposing chemically through oxidation. And that means that the nutrients are then basically going to waste. They're not in the land where it needs to have access in order to keep those cycles of life going again. So it's understanding how our management is going to ensure that those cycles are moving as quickly as possible, and understanding that it's time that it's the key factor, that it's not the number of animals. And then the last key factor, wrong direction. The last key factor is holism. So when we're talking about holistic management, we're talking about holism. Holism comes from the Greek word holos, meaning a whole, a unit. What we understand is that the ecosystem is one. The planet is one. When we break down thinking about different environments, when we think about riparian areas or a desert or a field or forests, or when we're talking about edge effect or these sorts of things, really what we're doing is, as humans, because we don't have the capacity to really understand the complexity of everything moving and shifting all at the same time. Well, we use this concept of holism to be able to see how everything is affecting everything else. No, the concept of the butterfly effect, how the one thing that I do will then affect everything else around me, will affect everything around it and everything else around it, and how what others do affects me and affects everything else around us. So it's, how can we be managing this complexity altogether? And that's what the holistic management framework allows us to do. So together with the four key concepts, we link that with the understanding the four ecosystem processes. So if we think of the ecosystem as if it were a building with four walls and a window in each building, or a window in each wall, looking into the ecosystem in the center. That's how the four ecosystem processes work. We understand that really there's only one. It's all, the ecosystem is constantly working all together, but we're able to look at or see or touch or analyze one of the four ecosystem processes easier at one moment or another. We talk about the water cycle, which I think everyone is familiar with. But we also talk a lot about how to impact the small water cycle. So how to ensure that the water that lands where the rain falls, to make sure that that water stays, that every drop is precious. So how can we make the decisions on our land management to ensure that that water, when it comes, is the most effective possible? If it's only going to rain one day in a year, then what can we be doing 364 days in the year to ensure that that one day is the most effective possible for the water cycle? The mineral cycle, which I've referred to quite a lot already, this is the cycle of decomposition of biomass. So whether it's plants, animal, insect, bacteria, anything, once that living creature has, that living being has died, it's decomposition back into the soil so that it is able to then grow, and so that plants are then able to grow from that. And then they are consumed, and then that manure comes back into the ground, and then that cycle going as quickly as possible. And the water cycle and the mineral cycle are very closely linked, because as water is the limiting factor of life, when there is no humidity available for that decomposition to happen, the mineral cycle comes to a stop. And what that means is that life comes to a stop, because then plants are no longer able to grow. When plants aren't able to grow, then that means that the soil microbiome comes to a halt because there's no photosynthesis happening. It means that there's no feed for animals, for insects, for birds, and everything comes to a halt. We talk about energy flow, so in terms of photosynthesis. So that's the conversion of solar energy through plants into carbohydrates, sugars, amino acids, and all the like. When we're talking about carbon sinks, this is what we're talking about. So how to ensure that we're converting as much solar energy into biomass as possible. And then we talk about community dynamics. So this is where biodiversity comes into play, understanding that the more complex the system is, the more resilient it is. So the more functional groups, more species in a system, then they're more resilient in the face of external influences. So disease, fire, drought, what have you. So those are what we're looking for. So understanding that no matter what we do, whether it's just thinking of how we get to work in the morning, or where we go on holiday, or when we're building our projects, and what the impacts of what we do are going to be on the communities, every decision that we make impacts somehow the four ecosystem processes. And so linking these concepts together with the four key insights of holistic management is what is the foundation for the holistic management framework, which allows us to make these decisions in a way that we can manage complexity. So within holistic management, we have a number of planning types that we then, depending on the context or depending on the project or the activity or the organization, we use some or all of them. So the holistic context and using holistic decision making, this is applied to everyone and can be applied to everyone and everything, whether individuals, families, organizations, businesses, NGOs, associations, farms. I often say even the hairdresser on the corner can be using holistic decision making when it comes to holistic context and the context checks. The holistic financial planning is also a piece that can be used whether you're managing natural resources or not. Holistic financial planning allows us to take back control over expenditures, over incomes, and understand where best to be putting energies and efforts to ensure the financial resilience that we're looking for. And then we're managing land. We have holistic land planning, which is how we can be designing farm infrastructure, for example, so that it is aligned with both our holistic context, but also with our holistic financial plan. So how to be paying for developing a land project without going into debt, or how to take an existing infrastructure and shift it towards one that is more in line with our holistic context, but without having to, and figuring out how to pay for that in the most logical but most resilient way. And then we have ecological monitoring, which is applicable for any nature-based project where we have methodologies where we are measuring ecosystem function and are measuring our capacity for change. We're seeing how season on season or year on year, the decisions that we've taken in terms of that land management are shifting in the direction we want to go, or if they're going in the direction we don't want to go, and understanding how from an ecosystem process perspective, we can be making decisions in a different way to achieve the outcomes that we're looking for. And then, of course, holistic planned grazing, which is one of the key planning tools that we have that allows us to manage complexity, allows us to not only just make sure that we have enough fodder for the animals, but that we're providing for all of the needs for the humans who are as part of the system, that we're achieving the economic goals that we set out with our holistic financial plan, that we're achieving the ecosystem restoration goals that we have set out, trying to improve the land and that ecosystem function using those animals. So all of that complexity is managed together. So when we're talking about holistic management, we're talking about wholes that overlap. So if we think of ourselves as individuals, we are one whole, right? But then together with our spouse, or our spouse and our children, these are other wholes. When we're working in organizations within our different teams, these are different wholes. If we're working in communities, these are different wholes. So understanding how those wholes overlap and how they're related to each other is key. So this is where we start to think of what is it that we're trying to achieve in terms of outcomes, and understanding what are the differences in our context in every situation. So every whole will have three pieces. It will have a decision maker or many decision makers. It will have physical assets that are under our control, as well as human resources that can help us to achieve these outcomes that we're looking to do. And then we will have financial resources as well. So every whole is different. And so it's key to understand everything that we have that we're able to manage in this under this one organism. Because if we don't have all of the decision makers present when we're creating this, what means is that we have missing pieces, and those missing pieces can mean that we then may not have alignment, or we may have someone come in and say no, or stop a project, or stop everything from where we're trying to go. So it's important to always have those all of those different voices represented when we're creating these understanding clearly what make up these wholes, and then when we're creating the holistic context that are going to allow us to manage those wholes. Excuse me. So the holistic context is made up of three very important pieces that are then designed and developed by those decision makers of each whole, right? So I think quality of life is a key piece that we unfortunately often forget, even for ourselves working in development where we're very passionate about our work and we give so much of ourselves. We often forget about quality of life, but oftentimes it's also the farmers that we work with. Many times it's them who are at the end of their ropes, who are at the end of their capacity to continue to manage their land, when they have so much risk on their plates. How can we help them to stop for a minute and imagine that things can be different and understand what are the things that are the most important to them? What are the values in life that are the most important to them? And to help them to understand that they have, and we all have, the opportunity that to truly redesign our lives in a way that is going to be fulfilling, and it is going to help us to, at the end of the day, feel like we have truly achieved our reason for being here. So when we are within an organization or within working with ourselves or with our families or within a project, we always want to have very clear the quality of life that we want to be having while engaging in this activity, because it's going to help us determine the yeses and nos of what we will do moving forward. We talk about our future resource base in terms of how we want the environment to be in that whole that we're managing, right? So whether it's a farm, it's a community, it's a country, or even someone who is not managing resources at all, but because they are a consumer, they have an impact on the environment no matter what their purchasing decisions are. So it's having clear how we want the environment to be in 200 years. With holistic management, we always take the very long-term view because what we're trying to do is, one, avoid the negative consequences that often come with short-term decisions and emergency decisions. We want to be thinking long-term that allows us to make short-term decisions that will allow us to get to that long-term legacy, really. So if we're thinking about how we want our community or our region or our country to be in 200 years, when our grandchildren have already died, and what is that legacy that we hope that we have inspired, that we have created? How we're going to get there is what is going to then feed into all of the decisions that we make now, which is why it's so important to have clear where we're going, but how we want to live our life now, the quality of life we want to have, because we can't serve from an empty cup. If we're all burnt out all the time, then we're not able to get to this long-term legacy that we're trying to create. And then what connects those two are our behaviors. The old adage of it's easier to attract flies with honey than with vinegar. If we are behaving in a way that people want to work with us, that people want to engage with us, that they share our vision, that they want to help us get where we're going, then that's how we can get there, how we can connect the two sides between how we're living and how we want things to be in 200 years. And I think that's one of the pieces that's so powerful when we're thinking about cooperation projects or nature positive projects, because if instead of thinking in terms of 5-year funding cycles or 3-year funding cycles or what can we do now, if we think of, okay, how do we want this land to be in 200 years? How does the communities that we're working with, how do they want this to be in 200 years? and then have clear the behaviors that they and we all need to have in order to achieve that, and understand how we want to live our lives now. That helps us to have that kind of broader, more holistic vision when we're creating ideas for these projects. So when we're trying to think of, okay, so this is theory, what does this look like in real life? On the left is a picture of a community in Digambombe in Zimbabwe, where they've been doing holistic management at a community level for over a decade. And the paper in pink, that is the holistic context that the community members came together and created. And that's what's the foundation for all of the decisions that they make together as a community and how they manage their resources. The picture in the middle, this was just earlier this week in Niger that Caroline, my colleague Caroline, was working with. And so what they did was they came together to create their action plan for their community, to create their grazing plan for their community. It's dry season there at the moment, so how they can be managing the limited resources that they have before the rating season comes. And then this little quick video, as I mentioned earlier, this is also there in Zimbabwe, in this land that's been managed holistically for 30 years, where 6 months after the raining season had ended, there was all of this forage for these animals. And for those of you who know a little bit about livestock, these are very fat cows. I was so impressed by this, because you would see the other animals and other farms nearby who are all skin and bones, but these very fat cows were because there was so much good quality forage that was still available because of that grazing planning. So once we've created our holistic context, then we have to understand how to use that holistic context. And we have the 7 context checks, which means that when we want to make a decision, a big decision, a small decision, then we run them through these 7 questions, relating them to our context. At the beginning, just like anything else, it can feel like a heavy process. But just like how you learn how to shift the gears in a car while driving without thinking about it, and it just happens automatically, using these context checks over time, you also get that same effect. So it's not quite so heavy as it may seem presenting it now. But when we're looking to make a decision about something, the first thing we want to look at is this idea of cause and effect, and looked for the root cause of the problem. If we're going to make a decision, or we're looking to take a decision, if it's not going to affect the root cause of the problem, then it's not worth the time or effort. We have to stop trying to solve symptoms of problems and really go straight to that root cause. Then we look at weak links. So if you think of a chain, and the chain is only as strong as its weakest link, this is what we're talking about here. If we're thinking, okay, the decision that we're going to take, or the thing that we want to do, is it going to create a social weak link? Is it going to create a problem with the neighbors, or with the company, or with the organization, or with, are you going to come up against some sort of law? Really try to understand, if you take this decision, is it going to create a social weak link? And the same thing with the environment. If we take this decision, is it going to cause a negative environmental impact? And the same thing with economic. if we're going to take this decision, is it going to inhibit our work? Is it going to make our financial situation weaker, or is it going to make it stronger? When holistic management, we talk a lot about marginal reaction. How can we think of this decision or this action that we're going to take, comparing it to another potential solution or action or decision? Which one is going to provide us the most with the least time, money, or effort? And by analyzing this, it will help us to be much more efficient in our resources. When we're analyzing a decision that has to do with economic activities, we always look at gross profit analysis, which is basically analyzing variable costs instead of fixed costs. So we look at to see what the impact is going to be, and whether or not we should continue to move with this decision based on whether or not it's going to be providing more economic resiliency or less. And then energy and money. Does the source of the energy and money that we're going to use align with our holistic context? And is the way we're going to use that energy and money align with with our holistic context? If we take this action, this is the penultimate, looking at sustainability. If we take this action, will it bring us closer to our holistic context, or will it take us further away? And then the last question is always gut feel. How do we feel, having now seen the answers to all the previous 6 questions? How do we feel about taking this decision? Will it help us to achieve the outcomes that we're looking for? Oftentimes, what can be is we'll go through the different checks and we'll see that we're going in the direction we want to go, or we're not, but we still want to do it anyway. And that's okay, because we've analyzed what those impacts are going to be. But other times you can say, no, we really want to do it. Or we can say, yes, but there's just something in our gut that says, no, we shouldn't do it. Well, then how can we understand where those issues were so that we can then resolve them? So taking all of these concepts into in mind when we're thinking about developing successful international cooperation projects, how can we be using these different pieces? I think very clearly is having the identifying the holes under management for each of the different players within a project, especially when we're talking about beneficiaries and different communities that we're going to be engaging with, and understanding very clearly who are the decision makers, the resources, and the money that's available in each of these holes, and then creating those holistic contexts for the project partners to make sure that everybody is aligned on where they're going with this project and what they're trying to get out of it and how they want to live during that project. But absolutely doing the same thing with the project beneficiaries to ensure that to ensure that those communities are also getting out of it what the idea of the project is meant to. Is that it's kind of like community consultation, but it's much deeper. And then using the context checks for decision making during project development and implementation will help to ensure that the project as it's being designed and implemented is aligned with those contexts, those holistic contexts that were created for partners as well as beneficiaries. Using holistic financial planning is key to financial health of the project because it's aligned with this holistic context, because it's aligned with the context checks, and really helps us, by looking at things like marginal reaction and gross profit analysis, really helps us to make sure that the plan, the financial plan that's underlying the project is sound. And then key for us is the use of the feedback loop. So making sure that what we planned is being monitored and controlled regularly to ensure that if the plan starts to go off track, what we need to do to get back on track. And then more specifically, for nature-based projects, we want to include ecological monitoring so that we have that clear baseline at the beginning of the project to know exactly how the ecosystem is functioning in those places where we're implementing the project before we start. And then as we're implementing, so that we can see year on year what those changes are. And that will allow us to be able to shift those management practices or the project based on whether or not we're achieving our outcomes or not. And then, of course, if you're in a project that does have a livestock piece, to begin to understand how to use livestock as an ecosystem management tool. So it's not just feeding animals to create meat, milk, dairy, but how to use those animals to be improving the ecosystem function that is then going to increase the amount of forage available, that'll improve the quality of crops that are being grown, that will improve the water cycle in that area, and then making sure to link that with the financial plan and the holistic context and the context checks. And then here, just at the bottom, or smaller, you can see some of the work that was done in Niger by Caroline this week, where they were mapping out the different paddocks where the animals could go within that village. I think it's important to note that there are no actual maps of this village. This was the first one. No one really knows in this community where the boundary lines are. So this was an important piece to just have them have clear what is where and what can they be using, and have this map so that they can then plan the movements through the grazing plan, which you see there in the middle. That's the grazing plan they made for the next several months during the dry season. And then the action plan that the community created in order to have very clear who does what, what's responsible for what, in order to achieve the outcomes that they're looking for. So just to bring this back to where we were at the beginning, really want to be focusing on addressing the root cause rather than symptoms of our projects, whether they're nature-based or not, because everything we do is nature-based at the end of the day, and really focus on that to achieve the triple bottom line. And now we've come to the bit of questions. I'll see if there has been some questions in the chat. Let's see. Can the host please introduce himself? That was you. This is Dr. Amr from CEDARE. The person missed your introduction. Yes. Could you please share the presentation via email? Yes. And then someone else had to go because everyone has very busy schedules these days. I just wanted to move to one more.
Just raising hands.
Yes, great. Just wanted to leave here our contact information. Yes. Ala, if you would like to open your. He can.
Yeah, unmute them. We need the IC, yeah. To unmute them, I think we might need to.
Allowed to talk.
Okay, you can.
You can?
Yeah.
Maybe. There we go. Allowed to talk.
Yeah, I think now you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, because I could not unmute myself. Anyway, so thank you so much, Megan, for this wonderful presentation. Truly inspiring. But honestly, this is the first time ever for me to learn about this holistic management approach for, nature positive projects. Now, I actually have a couple of questions. The first one is, how do we bring in climate change? Because, it's all good. It's quality of life, it's community development, and so on and so forth. But my question is, this is exogenous. I mean, okay, so, these people living in a community, climate is coming their way. I mean, I don't know how you could build resilience, could they adapt to this, but how can we protect them? What kind of preventive measures, what kind of, any kind of mitigation measures that we can take in order for them to be, holistically, as quote and unquote, think of it, to be able to cope with this. This is one, and especially that we all know about, climate injustice and so on and so forth. And in some communities, when it really gets bad, we resort to, resettlement, and I don't want to call it climate migration, but it is actually. People abandon their lands because of arid, the whole lot. But anyway, so this is one question. The other question is, you talk about financial analyses for the projects. But then when we try to connect the dots with quality of life, I think, and future generations, our kids, and you mentioned grandkids, okay? So I think what we're looking at here is far beyond financial analysis. We should be looking at the economic opportunities, the economic analyses as such, not just the financial. The financial, it could be at the expense of future generation. And you know that. I mean, we could be cutting trees down, making a lot of money, GDP going up, personal income going up, but then over the years, we're gone. Bye-bye, sayonara. So what I'm thinking of is, how can we strike this balance between current needs, financial, money coming in, versus long-term economic gains, which is the so-called sustainable development for our future generations. So how can we have this kind of trade-off under holistic management? Thank you. I'll stop here. And thank you so much once again. Very inspiring. And truly, I would like to thank Dr. Ahmed, because actually I was the one who asked the question about introducing yourself, because I'm sorry, Dr. Ahmed, I never had the honor or the privilege of meeting you before.
عمرو عبد المجيد.
أيوة دكتور عمرو. I'm so sorry. Why did I hear Ahmed? I don't know. I'm so sorry. It must be, something wrong with my hearing. So I need to go and check myself out. Okay. So it's a pleasure, Dr. Amr, meeting you, huh? So these are my questions, and it's just like to instigate some sort of a food for thought thing. I'm hoping this anyway. Thank you so much. Thank you.
No, and thank you so much for your questions, because they're extremely relevant. So first, in talking about climate change, so I think key is to understanding climate change is happening, right? There's nothing we can do really of course, other than keeping below 1.5 degrees C, there's nothing we can do immediately on an individual small scale to stop climate change. So it's a climate resilience and adaptation question. So how can we do that at the local scale, much larger as well, but how can we very practically be more resilient? And that comes from ecological literacy, which is a lot of what we do as an organization, is teaching communities and farmers ecological literacy, understanding how the ecosystem works and how everything we do impacts it. So, and this afternoon, we're going to be launching, which is very exciting, the 80-hour full holistic management course that we'll be doing with Nile University. Sorry for that small little pitch. But it's important to know that here in Cairo, we'll be doing that in February and April, where we'll be teaching people exactly this kind of understanding of nature, of the different ecosystem processes that we've talked about, of how what we do is then has one result or another based on those four key insights that we talked about at the beginning. So we get really down into the practicalities of what this all means. And that's exactly what we do with the communities as well. So what Caroline is doing with the communities in Niger at the moment, what we have colleagues all over the continent, in Southern Africa predominantly, but also in Kenya as well, working with the communities on those kinds of practical strategies, planning tools, how to be using them, how to be using their water, how to be using their infrastructure, how to be using their animals, how to do that in a way that is going to make them the most climate resilient possible. But also, and then moving over to your financial planning question, how to make it most economically resilient possible. And that's a key piece that we do using the financial planning methodology that we have with holistic management, which is a 16-hour training course on its own. So I don't want to get into that now, but just trust me. These are methodologies that have been developed and implemented by, and have been implemented all over the world. And what it allows us to do is to create these monitoring and systems to ensure that our expectations come true, and if our expectations don't come true, how we can be making the decisions to ensure that we're not robbing from the future. So and this is what the whole point of these long-term 200-year out views are, so that we're not chopping down trees in order to cook today. What can we be doing in order to ensure that we have the ecosystem services that are required for our habitat, so that we as humans and so the other animals and plants and insects and bacteria and fungi and everything else, so that we can all be living together. So that's all contemplated within those methodologies. And the reason why we decided to launch this webinar today was to give you guys a bit of a taste of the sort of things that we talk about, that we do, to see what kind of interest there is. Because what we would like to do with CEDARE is to offer a 2-day course specifically on using holistic management in international cooperation, projects development and implementation. So this concept we were talking about a bit at the end of my little talk, where we would spend very hands-on, spend a full day in ecological literacy, and then a full day breaking down existing cooperation projects, what worked, what didn't work, and how they may have been different if we used the holistic management framework to develop them and implement them. So I think this is going to be a really powerful experience for people who want to participate with us and have these conversations of how could we be doing things differently to ensure the social, environmental, and of course economic viability of these projects that we're doing with public and donor money moving forward. So that's a bit of the idea there. So I hope some of you who participated today will be interested to join us, hopefully here in Cairo, to do something like that next year. So I would encourage everyone to please reach out to CEDARE and let us know of interest in something like that, so we can be putting it together. Are there other questions? Anybody else wants to put their hands up? Follow Allah. Ah, yes, we have a question in the room.
Okay, so thank you so much for the presentation. It's really interesting, and the information and the holistic management approach is really an innovative one. But I'm interested to know from your experience, which seems to be more focused on the livestock and the management of the water cycle in that regard and better crops. Do you have some kind of a formula that what is the minimum to be used of a stock or in order to get the start of a water cycle in a region that is more of a desertified? So that has been always, because if someone has the experience or the data or the formula, then it would be our experts. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for that. I'm not sure if the people in the room could hear the question, but the question was basically, is there a formula to decide what is the appropriate stocking rate for animals in order to kickstart the water cycle so that it's working again? And the answer is, and this is a bit of an inside joke, we always say #depends, because everything is context-based. But what we do know is that it is high stocking rates with long recovery periods, and doing that at the right time, which comes from experience, it comes from trial and error, it comes from listening to the local communities, and when they know when the rain is coming, they know what the impacts are when the rain comes, they know where the water is going to run off, they know where it dries out too fast. So it's really that peer-to-peer learning. So where we are with the community, understanding from them their experiences, which then allows us to apply this knowledge to then create these solutions, these plans together with them, and then learning together as those are implemented and building up the ecosystem process function over time. The great thing is that in areas that are extremely degraded, you can have very fast results that are really impactful. It's kind of like how it's always hard to lose those last 5 kilos. When you've got really good land, to get to like the maximum is a lot of work and a lot of effort. But when you've got a really low baseline where things are just not working at all, it does not take very long or very much work in order to have that quick jump start and then have a place to begin, which is great. A lot of times, I think, especially now when people are talking about regenerative agriculture, which is, so sexy right now, and, the cost of transition and the investments that are required and all these sorts of things. I think one of the big benefits of holistic management is a term that Caroline coined, which is that it's low cost and high brain. This is the kind of work that we're doing. So it's understanding how the ecosystem functions, understand the resources that we have at hand, which is why doing the whole under management exercise at the beginning is so important, because it helps us to understand who is there, who is around to help, what assets we have. So what animals are there, or what lands are there, or what infrastructure, when is the water coming, when is it not, where is water available, having clear all these kinds of things, these pieces. And then we can put together that action plan, that implementation. It's like, okay, we've got this, we have nothing else. What can we do with this to kickstart? And that, I think, is what's really exciting, because it's not having to create these, big expensive projects where you have to do all of these investments and buy machineries and vehicles and technology and all that. No. It's just knowledge sharing, and it's not top-down knowledge sharing either. It's really engaging with the people, understanding and valuing their knowledge of their own community and knowing how that works. And then we just bring in those additional layers and help to build it up. So I think that's where the real power is.
Thank you.
If I can just add something. on
I'm
the-
not sure you can be heard.
Where is the mic?
I think it's here. I keep talking about Caroline. She's going to join us.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to complete a bit the answer, like people like us, say, doing holistic management or implementing holistic management at every scale or level in the world are on the 5 continents. So benchmarks of like, okay, how many animals would make sense? How much impact? Like a lot of experience and benchmarks have been developed and accumulated. Like there's even a person that is like the specialist for South Africa. His name is Roland Kroon. He's developed a scale of stock density per 100 millimeters of rain. So those benchmarks have been developed, and we can resort to them, of course, for any project. Also, like the scale, the time scale. 30, 40 years ago, it would take 15 years to get like the first like results at scale on the water cycle, for example. All of that has improved tremendously since then. Like even in very arid environments, very like Roland works with like 200 millimeters per year. And sometimes he gets it in one go, and that's it. In around 6-7 years maximum, you can see landscape changes, like at scale landscape changes, impact on the green water cycle, complete change of scenery in terms of what biomass is there, in what state, at what moment. So just to complete the.
Thank you. And I think also the answer of stocking density is much higher than we think. Alan has been asked so many times, has he ever seen a place where the stocking density was too high?
Right.
And he's always said no. He has never seen a place where the stocking density was too high. Where the animals were there too long, yes. And then they end up overgrazing, or they end up causing too much animal impact, right? But where, and which I think is also exciting, because it means that, in communities where, maybe every family has, a couple of goats or a cow or 2 or whatever, but then managing at community level where we can then have dozens or even hundreds of animals all together, then we can be using those animals to be preparing the lands for growing crops, using the animals to be increasing the forage production, using the animals to, instead of machinery, to be clearing land. We can use the animals as tools, which is great, because then you don't have to buy anything. It's just all knowledge and understanding that by increasing that stocking density is really one of the keys of shifting ecosystem function. Yeah.
Thank
you. I think there was other things in the chat. Earth observation data, which provides long-term dynamics of the lands, could provide a very strong baseline information for evaluating and conditions, not only project design prior to go to the field, but also ecosystem monitoring regularly. How do you use Earth observation satellite imagery in this context? Great, thank you for that question. So for ecological monitoring, we have 3 different methodologies that are all based on the same ecosystem knowledge, but depending on how much effort and time you have to put in something. So we have 2, one's basic and one is comprehensive, which measure on the ground sometimes it comes out in Spanish in my head. Surface, thank you. I was like superficie. Land surface, where we can be observing how those 4 ecosystem processes are functioning or not, which then allows us to make decisions on our actions to then shift in one direction or another. And these are the kinds of things that farmers, communities can be taught quite simply, so that they can be empowered with that knowledge on how to read the land, and then be able to implement that and do that over the time to then feed into their decision-making processes. Then there's also ecological outcome verification, which is the scientific methodology that Savory Institute has implemented over the past decade or so, and 60 countries around the world, 4 million hectares that are being monitored this way. And we're not using satellite data because satellite data is not yet granular enough on one hand, but also isn't able to really measure what we're looking at, right? So there's 15 indicators that we look at on an annual basis, and then every 5 years we look at lagging indicators, so things like water infiltration and carbon content in soils and these sorts of things that take longer to change. But what we look at on an annual basis, we're looking at functional groups of plants. We're looking at the existence of living organisms. We're looking at water erosion, wind erosion, these sorts of things, which you can't see from satellite. And though it is very time intensive and requires knowledge and training in order to do it, it's also exceptionally powerful, because when we're with farmers or we're with communities doing this EOV monitoring, it's like a one-on-one course of their land. So people learn intimately their land, and then they're able to make the decisions on that management to help them go in the direction or not that they want to go. So I think that's also why it's much, I'd say, it's not tech-based, right? This is the low-tech, high-brain piece. So how we can be using it to really have that intimate relationship. Let's see. Thank you so much for your presentation. What is the role of the local community in preserving natural resources, especially in this presented approach? Thank you so much for such a great question. So when we're talking about holes, right, and overlapping holes, so the example that I gave was, we as a single human being, right, and then we have our spouse. So that's a really sweet and romantic way of thinking about it. But actually, the first overlapping hole that we have is with our environment. Without clean air, without clean water, without clean food, this hole does not survive, right? It's all about habitat. So it's everyone's responsibility to have the clean environment, right? And so all of our decisions should be there, getting us there to that clean environment. So that, because basically we're being self-serving and protecting our habitat. So absolutely, the role of community in managing their natural resources is primary. It's that first, because if they're not managing their own habitat, they will not survive. It's as simple as that. So how can we be helping them to understand their habitat, understand how the environment, the ecosystem works, so that what they're doing is benefiting them and all the rest. And then that knockoff effect is then going to impact all the rest of us. And then what we do sitting in this very lovely office in Cairo also has impact on our environment and our habitat. So what can we be doing from here to do that? Yes. Kamel, let me turn on your microphone. There you go, sir. Thank you for joining us. Your microphone is open.
Yeah, thank you so much for this great presentation. I really liked it. And thank you so much also for Dr. Amr to get us engaged in such great approaches and great presentations too. I have actually 2 questions, if time allows. Is it okay?
Yes.
The boss
Thank you
says
so
yes.
much. This is really generous. Thank you so much. My first question is about carbon credit and the carbon economy, I would say. We all know that during these days it's COP30, and now the European Union is getting this CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, on board, and it is an issue all over the world now to get the carbon tax out of this trade all over the world and get the people paying from here and there, and it's really quite an issue. My first question is can we use this approach to quantify the carbon sequestration, I would say, or carbon calculations, carbon footprint to offset, in case they allow that, to offset the carbon credits that we are using during trade, or at least getting the people have some, I would say, non-conventional way of financing their business. Is it okay? Is it allowed? This is my first question.
Let me answer your first question before your second one.
Thank you so much. Please go ahead.
No, thank you so much. And yes, so there are projects that have been developed that include carbon financing or ecosystem service credits within it, in using the EOV methodology to show that. We, as in Hub del Norte, we're currently part of a project in Spain with 100 farmers and 10,000 hectares, which includes training, advisory, and of course the EOV monitoring, so that they're able to show year-on-year improvements. And but the exact carbon piece depends on the carbon developer each project is working with, because as I'm sure you know, there are different methodologies, and the science behind measuring carbon for carbon markets is evolving regularly. So the carbon monitoring methodology that is standard to EOV did not match with what the carbon credit developers currently want. So that has had to be integrated into this project that we're doing in Spain. So the answer is yes. Coming back to what we were saying before, depends, but absolutely can be if the project is designed that way. But I think that ecosystem service credits can be an opportunity to pay farmers and land managers for performance, because clearly the way they're producing food or the way they're managing land has many more values beyond, or much more economic value and social value beyond just the food, feed, and fiber that they're producing. So for some, these ecosystem credits could be a way to monetize that. There are others kinds of climate finance that are becoming more common now, payment on performance and these kinds of things, which we're also exploring for a different project, which could align. But EOV is absolutely one of the mechanisms that you can use in order to tap into those kinds of markets. Did that answer your question?
Excellent. Let me first comment on that. Thank you so much. This is really promising. I think we need to work on that and to find the approaches and to find the methodologies to quantify the carbon and so on. But this is really good news. Thank you so much. My second question is about actually, as I understand from your presentation, the matter is quite complicated. So there are water, economy, local communities, and all sort of natural resources, etc. Now, with the era of artificial intelligence, I think this business, this work, this approach can be much easier, because we need data. We can collect data through satellites, through sensors, or whatever. And then we employ the piece and the approach, the piece of artificial intelligence, or the tool, I would say, to make our life easy, to manage the situation, to manage the whole system. In addition to that, we can use the artificial intelligence in quantifying carbon by the end of the day as a non-conventional financial methodology. Is it doable?
Depends. No.
Okay.
No, and I'm teasing, but even like our t-shirts say depends on the back. So there are those who will always look for a technological solution, and so I'm sure there will be someone who will develop a way to use AI for these kinds of management systems. However, we prefer to focus more on natural intelligence, so learning from nature and following those systems and those patterns. Because what we found, and I think one of the big challenges with conventional agriculture, is when we try to simplify complex systems, we're reducing that resiliency by getting rid of the complexity, right? The complexity is where we get resilience. And so when you've got a single crop or a single species in a production system, what you're doing is you're opening yourself up to complete destruction. No, to disease, wheat crops, all the like drought. But the more complex you have in a production system, the more likely you will have this ability to deal with climate shifts, or the rains come late, or the rains come early, or there's too much rain, or there's not enough rain, or whatever, right? So I think if we rely too much on artificial intelligence instead of developing our capacities to be able to read the land, to understand how the ecosystem functions, and then to make the decisions on the fly that allow us to ensure that resiliency, I think that's probably a better way for us to go.
But with all the due respect, all the due respect for that, I really appreciate it. But what we think now is the use of calculator in my era. I'm an old guy, so in my era, we were we were using ourselves to calculate numbers. But afterwards, there are calculators, and my kids will laugh at me if I'm using my hand to calculate, my pen to calculate, especially difficult problems, I would say. But I'm almost sure that we will end with the artificial intelligence with the same issue, that afterward artificial intelligence will be there. It's not contradicting with the natural intelligence. There is no contradiction at all. But artificial intelligence will make us make things easier, make things faster, make things preciser. This is my opinion. Thank you so much again for your nice answer. I really liked it. Thank you, and have a great day. Thank you so much for having us in this event.
Thank you so much. And Caroline, you want to add something? She's our AI expert on the team.
I'm not. So yes, AI as a tool, like we develop tools constantly, and they're very useful, but they cannot replace really decision making and intelligence. We still need to be at the helm of all those tools, and we're kind of all thinking that we cannot handle complexity, but we can. And holistic management and those approaches, for example, they are a methodology to be able to maneuver, handle, decide with complexity. And yes, with tools too. But primarily, yes, we can handle complexity and then resort to the appropriate tools anytime we need them or anytime they are relevant.
I think we need to remember the most sensitive or the most delicate sensor that has ever been invented is the human body.
Yeah.
We have, if we listen to ourselves, we have the capacity to feel differences in temperature, in moisture, in light, in texture, in everything. And so I would encourage you to take these children of yours who would laugh at you for using a calculator and take them into a forest and make them sit down and listen and see
Excellent.
what they can detect. Yeah.
Excellent. I will do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Caroline. I would like to thank our participants online and participants in the room. And this is a very good start for the International Year for Rangelands and Pastoralism. And I'm sure there will be much more events, inshallah. And let's see you again, inshallah, during the International Year for Rangelands and Pastoralism. There are a lot of events ahead, upcoming, inshallah. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Shukran. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Yes. So, oh gosh, there was a whole Q&A section over here that we missed.
Questions?
Still online, by the way.
Yes, I know we're still online.
So,
I just saying the Q&A section, don't mind me. That's why we have IT people. Okay, this was already asked.
I think it's the same.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the chat. Yeah.
Oh, it was a bit different, but that's okay. That's fine. Thank you all, and we look forward to engaging with you in person in the near future.
and further, yes.